what is your opinion on why we have inflation right now? Because you were the free cash guy, and one of the biggest questions we got all the time was, won't this cause massive inflation?
The main reason we have inflation is that you have more demand than supply. Just like people want stuff, there's not enough stuff. and so the prices are going up. I'll give you an example. I went to buy a bike for my older son, and they were like, hey, we have no new bikes. And I was like, interesting. And then to the extent they had any bikes, the bikes were expensive. You know what I mean? So then, so you play that out across different categories, and so you have high inflation. Now, the simple relationship people are putting out there is like, oh, you've like put more money in the system, so prices went up. It's like, let's imagine that we had not put more money in the system. Is there a bike in that bike shop waiting for me?
No.
You know, like it didn't solve that problem. You know, so that's what's going on in different areas of the economy, and blaming it on quote unquote, you know, printing more money is an oversimplification. The argument I make is, look, we printed $2.2 trillion with the CARES Act, but it didn't go to people or families. It went to banks and airlines and the pipes. And so you can say it's like, oh, stop printing money, it's causing inflation. It's like, it's a little bit more complicated than all of that. Mm-hmm. But I will say that if you wanted to alleviate the misery caused by inflation, putting money into people's hands would be the way to go. And they're making that argument a little bit with Build Back Better. They're like, oh, it's going to help you with childcare. It's going to help you with this, going to help you with that. So it's a tough spot, but you can see the partisan communication around inflation, which, by the way, my sense is that it is serious, it's painful, it's at a level now where it's hurting people who have the least the most. This week on the podcast, first, happy Thanksgiving. Zach and I are going to talk about what we've been enjoying in terms of the streaming content universe. We are also going to talk about some tough stuff in the Rittenhouse verdict, what's going on with the Biden administration, and more. Happy Thanksgiving, Zach. So much to be grateful for.
Happy Turkey Day, man.
Yes.
What are your plans? You're in New Paltz?
Okay. Well, my famous
the infamous
New Paltz. But yes, I will be there. and so I thought we'd open with something really, really practical. And so I call my brother-in-law the content truffle pig, which is that he always finds like interesting things to watch in the streaming universe.
Okay.
So we're going to open up with some content recommendations for the people at home when what's going to happen is they're going to eat their Thanksgiving meal. They're going to watch the Bills win, hopefully.
Yep.
They're going to wake up, or maybe they'll stay up that night. They'll wake up the next day. They'll have a bit of time, and then they'll be looking for something to watch. Mm-hmm. So what do we have to recommend to the people as to what they can see that will make them happy? Okay, let's open up with that Netflix movie they probably already have watched, Red Notice, with The Rock, Gal Gadot, and Ryan Reynolds.
It's like lame, but it's good. You know what I'm saying? It's like an action movie. Have you seen it?
I did see it. So we can compare notes on this. All right. So this will be good because then everyone can judge whether they agree more with me or Zach. Like it was a confection is the word I'd give. It was very pretty. There wasn't much suspense to it. It was mildly enjoyable. You know, it was vastly superior to Red Notice, in my opinion. It was, if you haven't seen it on Amazon, and these two movies remind me of each other because they each cost $200 million and were on streamers essentially for free. Mm-hmm. The Tomorrow War with Chris Pratt.
Good movie.
Did you see that?
I did see that.
Okay, it's months old now. But if you did not see it, because a lot of people didn't see it, I think like you can pick that one up. Red Notice is fine. It's like worth having on, and like like frankly, you're going to take your phone out at some point. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's not like riveting, but it's like I love The Rock, I love Ryan Reynolds, I love Gal Gadot. I thought it was so like in that sense, pretty good movie. It's relatively funny. It's entertaining.
I do like those stars.
Like a good entertaining family flick, generally speaking. I think it's probably rated R, but it's still good.
I don't think it's rated R.
I don't know if ratings work anymore. I think they swear and there's some violence. Whatever that means nowadays.
It looks like Zach saw the special rated R version.
I saw the explicit version of Red Notice. I wish.
I must say, anytime I watched it with Evelyn, and anytime Gal Gadot was on screen, one of us would say, "God, she's so pretty."
Yes, that was implying. I mean,
which is great that your wife could just bust that out too. Like you don't have to be self-conscious about being like, "Oh, like I'm gonna pretend I don't notice that she's." I think I quote Evelyn like the prettiest woman alive.
She's yeah. So I have a good relationship, very secure.
We met a lot of celebrities in our adventures, Zach, but Gal Gadot has eluded us thus far.
We've not met Gal. We met Sophia Bush. Is it Sophie Bush or Sophia Bush? Sophia, right?
Yes.
I had a crush on her when I was in middle school, and we met her in real life, and I kind of froze, man. I always thought I'd play that cool. Kind of froze.
I remember that day.
Kind of froze.
So Zach is a very cool guy. I think people can sense that.
So cool.
So I don't remember him freezing. I do remember him after the fact saying he had a childhood crush on Sophia Bush. And the same day we met my rock god idol, Eddie Vedder.
Oh yeah.
And I did not freeze.
You did not freeze. You were all about it.
I was so cool. I was like, sup, Eddie. No, I wasn't like that. But I did say to him, I was like, hey, huge fan, admire. And then he said something nice to me.
Yeah, that was cool.
And it did make my heart sing. Imagine a person you rocked out to in your 88 Honda Accord, as a teenager, then saying, what did he say to me? He said, so he was leaving when I was coming in. He said, oh man, I'm missing the main event.
Oh yeah, that's right. That was cool. It's like when you see, because we did get to meet some cool people on the trail, and if they say something to you that is like remotely positive, it'll stick with you. So like my example is when we met Dave Chappelle the first time, and you were like, hey, this is my campaign manager. And I was like, hey, Dave, great to meet you. He was like, oh, you're the campaign manager. You're doing a great job. And then pretty much just started talking about something else. But I was like, I always felt like I might put this, I want to see if I'll put it on the cover of my book. Like, you did a great job. Or something of that sort. I just thought it was a very Chappelle way of
he does just cut to the heart of things, doesn't he?
It was funny.
But yeah, man, we should ask him. And also reminder, Zach Grauman has a book coming out in February.
Oh yeah, May 24th. We're gonna hype this up.
Oh shit,
you guys gonna like it.
It's not till May.
No, it's not till May, man. I think they wanted a breather from Ford's book. I don't know. Or there's supply chain stuff in the books too. It's actually pretty serious.
There is a supply chain thing in books. That's true. That my publisher told me that stuff, and so we had to talk about making a warehouse full of Forward books. It's like it's in Connecticut. It's like out of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It houses 50,000. I'm kidding. None of that.
We're gonna crush audiobooks is what's gonna happen. All right, show rec, and then we'll talk about more depressing stuff. Can't wait to talk about more depressing stuff. Show recs. I have 3. 2 I've seen, 1 I haven't, but I'm pretty pumped about.
Continue.
Okay. 1, have you seen Midnight Mass on Netflix?
It looks tremendous, but I have not seen it.
It's freaky. And if anyone's grown up religious, like my mom was Catholic. I grew up Protestant, but the way it's done is pretty wild. It's kind of scary. Like it does it's a little jumpy, So if you don't like that,
that looks awesome.
That. But it got pretty good. I was like, I randomly found it. Like it showed up on Netflix, and then I looked up. It wasn't just me thinking it was good. Like it had I think it got an 80 or something, 80+% on Rotten Tomatoes. The other one, this is older, but no one ever talks about it enough. There's a show called Shadow and Bone on Netflix that is like a fantasy situation, and
is it good? I have not seen it.
I loved it. It's one of the guys from Westworld is one of the main characters. I'm going to look up. They renewed it for season 2.
Really?
And season 1 got on Rotten Tomatoes. Oh, yeah. I'm not that. 89% audience score. So I'm not losing my mind. Shadow and Bone on Netflix. Very good. But the one I'm super excited about is the new Beatles documentary coming out. Did you hear about this?
No.
It's called Get Back. So it's Peter Jackson, the director of Lord of the Rings.
No way.
Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson has like all this unwatched footage from the Beatles, apparently. It's 7 hours. It's on Disney Plus, I believe. Don't hold me. Oh, it's Disney Plus. Cool. I was like, don't hold me to that. No, you can hold me to that now. It airs, I think, Thanksgiving night. It airs, let's see when this comes out. Yeah, it's up on November 25th. Yeah, Thanksgiving night. So tonight it airs, and it could suck. I haven't seen it, but I'm pretty optimistic.
So the series that we are presently addicted to is Succession. Have you
Ooh,
watched
I
this?
haven't watched any of the new season. I heard it's pretty good. I've watched the first 3 though. I
Did you
love
like
it.
the,
Yeah, I
the
loved it.
early
It's
seasons?
hilarious.
So Succession is both funny and dark at the same time. I will say I walked into one of the Manhattan buildings that they used as a setting for Succession in Hudson Yards.
Yeah.
And then I literally just started humming the Succession themes, like plink, 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 plink. And then I went home and told Evelyn about the story. But Succession is excellent, and I'm going to do a random deep cut of a movie that I watched on Netflix, and it stars Jamie Lannister. Now, this is gritty, so you have to be in that frame of mind. It's called Shot Caller, and it's about a guy who winds up in jail, Jamie Lannister. I can't say his real name. It's like Nikolaj Kostar Waldau or something. But Jamie Lannister, and he goes to jail, and then he becomes a badass, and then he comes out, and it's well done. It's gritty. It was made by one of those pro-social movie studios, so it's like a message film, but it was and you think to yourself, there's no way that you can convince me that Jamie Lannister went to jail as like a normal dude and comes out like a hardened criminal, but the movie does a good job with it. So Shot Caller, deep cut
On
gritty
Netflix, right?
movie. I saw it on Netflix. Yes, it's probably still there.
And Jamie Lannister's actual name is Nikolaj Coster Waldau. He's Danish.
I'm told he's very handsome in real life. Another person we never met.
That's not surprising.
Also, we just saw King Richard, the Will Smith movie about Venus and Serena Williams coming up as kids. And wow, was that movie really, like, it was a great watch. You were watching it being like, wow, this really happened. And then you realize it did really happen. It was one of these kind of truth stranger than fiction. So inspirational. Evelyn and I immediately joked, it's like, why aren't we trying to turn our kids into tennis prodigies, even though that would be a total bust. But King Richard is a great watch. It's we saw it on streaming. One
of my favorite actors, Will Smith, for sure. I think his range of like the A-listers that are out there, his range is, I don't know. I can't really say second to none. I don't think he's ever won an Academy Award. I was looking this up.
They're saying this is going to be Oscar bait, but he does a very strong job inhabiting this character because you kind of forget he's Will Smith sometimes, and then the character is three-dimensional. Like, he's presented as a highly imperfect human being, shall we say, even though his visions for his daughters came true in the most spectacular fashion imaginable.
Yeah.
And it made me try and remember when Venus and Serena Williams made their professional debuts, because I do remember, and right. I remember Venus Williams being good, and they say, hey, FYI, her little sister's better, and we were like, can that be real? And then Serena comes and dominates. I then told, I mentioned to Evelyn that friend of the podcast, Alexis Ohanian, is married to Serena Williams, so we know Mr. Serena Williams.
That's
even
true.
though I'm friendly with Alexis, but I have not met Serena.
No. I loved Men in Black 1 and 2, and I was obsessed with that soundtrack for the second one, which wasn't good, for the record. Do you remember the soundtrack of Men in Black 2?
Dun, 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 dun,
no, it goes, the first one was more iconic, but the second one was, nod your head, the black suit's coming, nod your head. Anyway.
Will Smith used to make a song for every movie. Remember that?
Oh yeah, he has 4 Grammys. This is the thing. He's been nominated for 2 Academy Awards and 5 Golden Globes.
We should do a conversation on the most singable Will Smith anthem.
Oh,
it has to be Miami.
Miami, right?
Bienvenido, Ami.
Wild West too.
So here we go.
We're going straight to the wow.
Wow, that song and movie just kind of.
He's got some hits, man. Got some bangers.
So those are our content recommendations. Please feel free to send us yours, because clearly Zach and I watch stuff.
We're limited. Clearly, we're not that bad. But yeah, clearly we watch stuff. We do watch stuff, man. That's how we get through, frankly, some of the annoying or depressing or sad or dark news of the day. But we do need to talk about it, because we haven't talked about it at all.
All right, so now that we have done the happy Thanksgiving content stuff, we're going to talk about what's been dominating the news over the last number of days, and that is the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. And it's a tough subject. Anytime I think about it, it just makes me sad and disheartened for where we are as a country. I thought that the verdict was legally appropriate, but a very, very tough and negative message.
I feel like we need a trigger warning if we're going to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse, because we've been silent, avoiding Twitter on this.
Well, Twitter is the wrong medium,
Correct.
in my mind. You know what I mean? It's like you put something out and then you have to go deeper into it. So first, let me say that the entire thing just makes me very, very sad. I think that is the appropriate emotion, where this young man, kid, I mean, he was technically a kid at the time, 17, goes to the site of a protest with an automatic weapon, ends up killing 2 people and wounding another, and then is acquitted. And I have a tough set of emotions on it, because I think that what we see here is someone who did something that, in my mind, was the opposite of praiseworthy, was immoral, was dangerous. It ended up taking people's lives. But I understand the verdict, because according to the letter of the law, you can see why they can argue that he was acting in self-defense and that the state did not meet its burden of proof. And for the folks around the country who are saying, look, this verdict doesn't send a positive message, I would happen to agree with that.
Yep.
Like, I think that somehow stamping that this kind of dangerous, careless, reckless kind of behavior that did result in people's deaths is legal, I think is a very, very difficult negative message to be sent out there. But I understand why he was acquitted, because I think that the self-defense rationale was borne out by various pieces of evidence.
People on both sides are very, 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 have been very, very angry about this. They're very, very emotional about this. Do you think, to me, my opinion is that this is like a poster child for media inflammation of certain stories. Do you think the media has a lot to blame with how we're literally so polarized on this trial?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the media, unfortunately, is now trying to pit everything in terms of this civil war, which in my opinion is more and more likely, in part because of the media. There's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy going on. And certainly the lionization of Kyle Rittenhouse in certain quarters of the right-leaning or Fox News universe, I completely disagree with. I mean, like, presenting Kyle Rittenhouse as a hero strikes me as very, very irresponsible. But on the other side, I think that they're presenting Kyle Rittenhouse as also some kind of racially motivated white supremacist type, which, I don't think is necessarily borne out also by the fact, or should be the focus. I mean, the focus should be that these 2 people lost their lives, a person was wounded. And for Kyle Rittenhouse, especially because in this case, when you look at it and say, well, it shows that, a white man can do no wrong in the United States of America. I mean, his victims were white. So, that doesn't necessarily fit the prevailing type of narrative. Though what it says to me really is that our gun laws are messed up, which I think a lot of people would agree with. But according to the laws as they're currently written, I understand the verdict.
These 4 things can all be true at the same time. And if you live on Twitter, none of them, only one can be true or so. These are the 4. 1, national media did not cover this case accurately, particularly in the year or so leading up to the trial. That's number 1. Number 2, that this is objectively a tragedy, that a 17-year-old with an automatic rifle feeling that he not only needs to defend his city or be in that that environment, but that maybe that he's entitled to do that he should be, right? I think that's a tragedy. The third one is that the evidence of self-defense was pretty to, I would say, very strong, actually, when you look at the facts of the case. And then Julian Castro tweeted this, and I thought was interesting, is that if Kyle Rittenhouse was black, we're probably having a different conversation, and there's probably a significantly higher chance he's in jail.
Well, I mean, there's a higher chance that he would have been shot on the scene if he'd been black. You know, I mean, like there is an issue where he was walking past law enforcement with his hands up,
and they were supporting him. Yeah, they were encouraging him.
So those things are real, but no, I don't think that it's appropriate to want a verdict to be in keeping with like a particular message. I mean, it is a person. It's a court of law. If the person's to be acquitted on the basis of the law, I mean, you have to accept that, in my view. So it's a very tough situation. It makes me sad. It makes me sad for the families of the people who lost their lives. It makes me sad that our country is trying to make a cause out of what, in my view, is something that a very, very, irresponsible, immature 17-year-old did. Like lionizing that kid as a hero strikes me as irresponsible in itself. No, one of the struggles that I have very often is that you see something happen, particularly in this age of social media, and then you magnify it. And you can look at this incident and say, oh, there's like a race war or civil war. And that's a narrative that the media does love and love to fuel. And I try and remove myself at least a couple steps and say, wait, like, is this like an army of people all organized, or is this just one, in this case, 17-year-old with terrible ideas? And then the reverse happens in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and you can say, look, is this all people of color or black people? Like, of course not. Like, we can't be seeing things through these collectivized, racialized lenses, or else anytime someone does something, it's like, oh, all people of that background will think a certain way, will act a certain way. As soon as you start to generalize to that degree, then we're lost, in my opinion. Like, I try and look at something and say, okay, this human being made these terrible decisions. And our systems do have issues for sure. And I think there's a way that we can make progress on them without succumbing to some of like the baser narratives. But this thing just has made me very sad. And I do very, very much dislike the message that somehow it's appropriate to take the law into your own hands, leave the house with a weapon. Like those things are very negative in my view.
I was talking to Carly about this, and she said there's like the macro argument and the micro argument. So on this macro on a justice level, and the macro justice level, there's a lot of people on the left. There's like, well, white people have been in power for a long time and they deserve this. And on a macro, maybe that is, if you're trying to balance a scale, maybe that's a true statement. But on the micro level, if you look at Kyle as a human in the actual cases, in that, if I was watching from the outside, I was looking like I thought we all were under the impression that he was from outside of Wisconsin, brought his AK-47 that he got illegally, and was shooting down, mowing down Black Lives Matter protesters, and that he's a white supremacist. And that was like the recurring narrative, even on the right. And they were saying, the right's early narrative was, this is the fault of bad government and not the fault of the kid. And they were even defending him, and they weren't even, they're kind of giving that side of the argument to the Democrats. But when you look at the facts, is that he was actually from Kenosha. Like, he lived there, his dad lived there, he had a job there. The gun was legal in the state of Wisconsin. And the people he shot were not Black Lives Matter protesters. They were actually convicted criminals who were white. And not that matters when you're talking about a human life, but it's just a different narrative that's been framed. So there's macro and micro, and I think Twitter there's no nuance for that. A lot of people don't want that nuance. They picked a team, and they're either happy or upset of this, and it's a shame. I think it's a tragedy.
Yeah, if you're on Team Humanity or Team USA, it's just sad. It's like the thing, and it does, in my view, send a message you do not want to send, which is that vigilantism is somehow appropriate, or that this person's actions were somehow not just legal but moral or praiseworthy. Yeah, I happen to think that he should not have been there, certainly with a firearm and the rest of it, and that these people's lives should not have been lost in this way.
The fact that you can get these types of weapons,
that's really
open carry them,
problem. And in Wisconsin, it's totally legal to walk.
So, but I wanted to make sure we haven't talked about it at all.
Well, before, frankly, the trial was going on, and then what do you need to talk about? And then the verdict comes out, and then it's just like a hypercharged like Twitter atmosphere, and then you're like, well, it's like I would have to go on for some length to try and express something that isn't. Yeah, and part of it too is like I always try and be helpful or productive. And so if you're like, hey, I'm just going to say something to say it. It didn't seem like the right approach. But clearly, we see this, and at least on my side, like I've just felt very sad about it every time I've been reflecting on it for the last number of days.
So this article was written that we were reading on New York Mag, Intelligencer. What's the actual title of it? The Biden Squeeze, Joe Biden's Big Squeeze. But he talks about the pressure, particularly on the left, of you have like the activists and the outrage, and there's pressure coming from there, and then you have where the actual voters are, and particularly on the left, they're struggling, and Joe has been stuck in the middle. So let's talk about this article because, in a way, it kind of encapsulates Kyle. And that whole trial too, at least in terms of the dynamics at play.
Yeah, so I thought this article was fascinating, and if you haven't read it, you should check it out. It's by Jonathan Chait, Chait, in New York Magazine, and it has one turn of phrase that I think is getting quoted a lot. He talks about Joe Biden as a patient who's wasting away of some undiagnosable disease, which is a very, very tough image, and I thought that description, unfortunately, it reflected what many people are feeling. And the dynamics that Jonathan Chait points out are that you have this very, very inflamed progressive wing of the party. And one thing he references that I know you and I talked about on the campaign trail, Zach, was that wing could be summarized on the presidential trail by Elizabeth Warren. Like Elizabeth Warren took great pains to win over those activists.
The intellectual progressives, which Jonathan talks about as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So she went hard in that direction, and she won those organizations. Like if you look at the organizations, they all endorsed her. And then when it came to the primaries, the votes weren't there. And I thought that should be a very, very stiff lesson, which is that it turns out that most mainstream Democratic voters don't actually take their cues from these organizations. And then if you try and extrapolate that to the general population, then the relationship will be even weaker. So
yeah.
But there's a lot of energy in those quarters. There's a lot of social media energy. There's a lot of media attention. A lot of journalists are sympathetic to it.
And money.
And apparently there's some money. So this is one of the minor revelations of this article, is it talks about how there are major funders, major donors who are giving to these organizations, which are dragging the party left. And they made this comparison, I think. They said that Democrats have moderate voters and very, very left-leaning donors. And then the Republican Party, it's the reverse, where you have moderate donors and very, very right-leaning voters. Yeah. So I thought that was a funny
Here's the quote.
juxtaposition.
The Koch brothers are strategic. Their voters are bananas. Our voters, our Democratic voters, are moderate, but our funders are crazy.
Was what they'd said. So that was, I thought, a very interesting characterization of what's going on on the left. It turns out that a lot of elements of this legislative package are very popular. The Build Back Better, whenever you poll them, I think they had them at 58% plus most of the measures. And this is the other side of the squeeze, is that Joe Biden's agenda has gotten stifled by various centrist senators, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, chiefly among them. And the argument that the article makes is that, look, the fact that there are a lot of people recoiling at some of the leftist cultural messaging actually does not mitigate the appeal of some of the economic measures that are being considered around family leave, lower drug prices, childcare,
universal community college.
Yeah, like these things are actually by and large popular. So the issue with Democrats, unfortunately, is that their agenda is getting stifled, even though their agenda is kind of popular by some people on one side, and then the other side is pissing everyone off because they're making various cultural arguments that the majority of people don't like. And this is a note that Bill Maher has been hitting very, very hard over the last several weeks.
Yes,
it's funny, just because like I was on his show, maybe I'm sensitive to it, but then he went on CNN, and he's been really hitting this hard. His latest thing was about how if he was the messaging czar, here's what he would do. And he's pointed out the tough truth is that when you present any of this to the Democratic Party, certainly the progressive wing, there is zero self-reflection or desire to moderate the message. What they argue is that Virginia was lost not because of anything they did, but maybe Terry McAuliffe was too moderate and you should have had like a more diverse candidate or something along those lines. That and because of this disconnect, I think that it's going to be tough that no matter what happens, I think that Democrats are going to act in a certain way, not because they necessarily even believe it's going to maximize their chances of victory. Something that someone posed online to me said, hey, why would they do this if they're trying to win? And what I responded reflexively without thinking about it was like, they actually don't care if they win.
Yeah. They want to be right on the right side of history. I guess, right? What else? What's the other goal?
Well, so this is one of the weaknesses of a duopoly, in my view. And the framing I've been using is that the two sides play you lose, I lose, you lose, I lose, while we all do the losing. But they don't truly lose that for long. You know, it's like if they fumble an election away, then they'll still be around. This is another disconnect in terms of the incentives of a select number of legislators in Congress versus the party. So, okay, check it out. Let's say I'm like a very left-leaning progressive. Now, if the Democratic Party loses the majority, then in theory, I will have less ability to influence legislation. So that should make me sad.
Right.
Now, the people that define whether the Democratic Party keeps the House are not people in super blue areas, but in really swingy areas like in, central Pennsylvania, like the Lehigh Valley. It's like that is the race. Michigan, places like that. If you win some races there, then you get the majority. So the people who are the swing districts can go to the progressives and say, hey, like, can you like help me out? Like maybe either don't hit that message as hard or, or do something.
Take a couple plays off on this one or stay on the sidelines.
But the motivations of the folks on the progressive wing are not to help that person in the swing district out because they're getting all their energy and emails and fundraising appeals and donations from people who really want them just to keep hitting the message. And so then if the party loses and someone comes to them and says, hey, you guys are losing it for us, that they'll turn around and just be like, no, we're not. And because it turns out that their individual incentives are different than the party keeping a majority.
To me, what bothers me about the far left progressive movement is that the word is progressive. It's supposed to be to drive progress, and it becomes anti-progress at a point. There is value in like standing for something and putting the flag out there and saying like this is right or wrong. But then if you can't get your goal and you're in a zero compromise mode, then it's this all or nothing situation, right? Like the Green New Deal is my favorite, and they talk about in the article, which the Green New Deal was supposed to be a climate change plan that you could theoretically get bipartisan support. That deal ends up, if you read it, which I haven't read the entire thing. I've read probably 5 or 6 summaries and a couple of long experts. I want to get some details. But it includes a call for Medicare for all, affordable housing planning, student debt forgiveness, and economic security for all who are unable or unwilling to work. And that's a quote. And I don't know, like you could, like in those swing districts too, like it's tough enough to get one thing done. If you have to throw 7 or 8 things in there at once, you end up hurting, I think, a lot of the moderates or people just live in districts like, yeah, I am progressive, but I also have to be, allegiant to my voters or whatever.
So I'm aligned with a lot of elements of like what you'd consider like a progressive vision.
Yeah.
And what's funny is I think, to use Bernie as a template, I think Bernie led on economic populism.
Yes.
And then he did not necessarily go in for every cultural battle.
Right.
I think that's where a lot of Americans are. That's where I am for the most part. I mean,
Right.
people know that I'm into trying to elevate people's standard of living. So this is the weird thing that makes it complicated, Zach, is that you look at it and, I started the Forward Party and people are like, oh, that's centrist. Like, I don't see it as necessarily, like, oh, we should just be doing small things and nibbling at the edges. Like,
Right.
I think we need very, very big changes, which is what a lot of progressives say and believe too. I think my issue is like an inability to like switch tacks or framing. Is like if you're hitting a particular point and it's turning off a certain body of voters, and you look up and be like, okay, what am I trying to do? In my case, it's like alleviate poverty. Like, is this other thing helping me alleviate poverty? No, then maybe I should focus on something that's going to work to try and advance that cause. And I was relatively single-minded around poverty. Like, I just want to, fight poverty and anything that's going to help me fight poverty. And so that's like the issue I'd take is like, look, if people don't like a particular term you're using, just change terms. Who cares? you know what I mean? Like that's like we called it the freedom dividend. Why? Because like more conservatives liked it. It tested better. It's like it's like we just like figure out a different way to present and frame things, like de-emphasize things that are turnoffs to certain people, because the polarization that's picking up, and it says it in this article, it's between people who are educated and people who are less educated. And so anything you do that like seems like you're snooty, elitist, including a lot of the terminology you use, then you have to try and get away from that impulse. You have to be thinking about the random blue collar worker who used to vote Democratic in Ohio and Michigan, and whether they give a crap about, like a particular new term that came into being, X years ago. It's like, and they're just trying to make ends meet most of the time.
The enemy, in my opinion, is the folks that are passing those anti-abortion laws in Texas. We're like sending us literally decades backwards. And they're...
Oh, yeah, those laws are terrible.
Right? These are horrible. Or you could argue McConnell putting, like, let's call it conservative justices that are pro-life or anti-abortion on the Supreme Court, if that's what you're actually fighting for, right? Your enemy is usually not just like specifically your moderate Dems, or the people aren't using the right terms or don't fully agree with your hyper progressive agenda. Like they could still be an ally. Like the one example they use in this article is of Darren Walker, who's the head of the Ford Foundation. This guy, Darren Walker, is a black guy born at a charity hospital in Lafayette, Louisiana, raised by a single mom, and grew up to be one of the leaders in the United States in learning the Ford Foundation, which is probably...
I saw him speak. He's very impressive.
He's extremely impressive. One of the biggest and most influential nonprofit organizations in the country. He wrote an essay called The Defense of Nuance, saying, like, basically talking about his proposal to reform or get rid of Rikers Island in New York City, saying, like, we have to... Like, here's what we want to do. We also have to say that capitalism has also helped a lot of people get out of poverty and has changed the world for the better, like in many examples. And he got crucified for even alluding to, I guess, the word nuance, frankly. Like literally people holding signs outside the Ford Foundation saying, fuck your nuance, is in the article. And so now I don't know Darren Walker well enough to know how great or bad he is. But my point is he's clearly attempting to be an ally in this fight for, let's call it, progressive change. And our own party's trying to knock him off, right? Like, I don't, and I think we've kind of lost, I just think we lost our way. I don't know what you think.
Oh, yeah, it's tough. I mean, like now the wrong turn of phrase trumps decades of work,
There's a way
that's like one of the most messed up things about it is like, if Darren Walker spent his life doing something positive, doesn't matter. It's like
you said the wrong word.
Yeah. Or, framed it wrong. And that's something that is a disease of this time. It's like if someone says the wrong word, maybe you could be like, hey, I prefer a different word choice, please, instead of.
Can we talk about it? Yeah.
Or can we talk about it? But instead, it's now enough for some people to want to usher you out of public life, which doesn't make much sense.
And this article is arguing that a lot of the progressive causes, activists, organizations are fighting for people of color. And he's saying by the numbers, you are losing people of color.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the issues, too, is that you have people who purport to speak for other people. And then it's like, if you actually talk to the Black and Latino working class voters,
they're more moderate.
They're more moderate. They tend to be straying a little bit from the Democratic Party in like slightly higher numbers as a result. So, like you have a lot of these distortions, in my mind, are born of social media.
Do you think it just requires a spine to say, F the mob. This is the right thing to do. I know what my voters want. I don't care what Twitter says. I don't care if they're going to hammer me. Or there's the incentive so strong to cater to the left that it's a system problem too. Or it's definitely both. But is it one or the other?
Officials should try and lead in a way that's genuine to them. And this is one thing you got to say about Joe is Joe did kind of tame the leftist wing during the primaries.
Yes, he did.
And then now he's getting accused of being too left. That's the point of the article, is that he's getting caught in a vice.
He's in a no-win situation.
He's in a bit of a no-win situation. I feel for him in the administration in many ways, because it's like one of the big arguments you'd have to make here is, look, the Democrats, this is a high watermark, and the high watermark is a split Senate where Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin have all the power, and so you're not going to be able to get a lot of big things done. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen in 22? You're probably going to lose the House, maybe the Senate. What's going to happen in 24? Anyone's guess, but right now you'd have to say that it's probably Trump in the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And I had a conversation this weekend with someone that really hit home for me in a particular way, where they were asking, hey, Andrew, about half Americans now think we're heading towards Civil War 2.0. What do you think? And I was imagining 2024, November, when Donald Trump is running for president. And in my mind, there are two most likely outcomes. Number one, he wins straight up. Number two, he claims he wins, even though he lost a close one. And let's say in scenario number one, if he wins straight up, will there be widespread riots on the street in blue cities around the country protesting the fact that Trump is their president again?
Probably. I'd say definitely yes, actually.
Yeah, as soon as you think about it, you're like, oh, yeah, they totally would
happen,
be.
Yeah.
And so there will be violence in the streets in that outcome. And then if Trump loses barely, and I will have to say, like, him getting trounced seems very unlikely, because it's going to be a nail biter no matter what. But if he loses barely and claims victory, will there be violence in the streets? Almost certainly, yes. So when you fast forward, you realize that if Trump runs, you're probably going to see violence in the streets regardless of the outcome.
Wow, this is dark, Andrew.
That's what I'm here for. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I feel bad.
Well, the ironic thing is that this is theoretically avoidable if the Democrats, particularly the far left, is actually more open to getting something done and passing the bills that, like, their popular economic proposals, and getting those done. Because look, if Biden is able to usher that and unite the party and actually deliver for the American people what they're all claiming for, both on the right and the left in many ways, which is a better path forward economically and an economy that's actually working for human beings, you can see Biden's approval rating skyrocketing if he did that well.
Well,
the power's in their hands.
They're maxing out what they can deliver, and it's certainly not the progressive left that's holding them back right now. It is Sinema and Manchin.
Yeah, right now it's the other way.
Yeah. It is.
The rich don't want to get taxed.
Yeah, so they're going to get a version of Build Back Better passed. The big open question then will become how much is going to be felt by voters in a way that's going to turn both the narrative and the electorate around in the face of rising inflation, which will persist for at least a while. And that's a tough one, too. It's that even if Build Back Better gets passed in some version in December, how soon until Americans look around and feel great? I had a conversation that's going to be on the podcast pretty soon with a guy named Derek Thompson. Yeah. And we discussed how at this point your experience of the economy is partisan, which is a really fucked up thing.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
But that if you are a Democrat, you feel like the economy is doing better under Joe than if you're a Republican by some insane margin, like 50 points. Like 87% of Democrats are like, oh, it's good, and 37% of Republicans. But here's where it gets dark.
Okay.
If you flipped it around, it was the reverse when Trump was president.
Right.
That the Republican edge was 47%. And there was a period when Joe had won the election and had not taken power, so clearly nothing had changed, where the thing already flipped. So at this point, the way you experience the economy is born as to how you feel about the party in power.
Is this because the economy doesn't actually reflect our well-being, right? Like kind of what you talked about before when you ran for president, like GDP, stock market doesn't touch people's daily lives?
I think that's a lot of it. Another thing is just how polarized and partisan the country is, where if you watch Fox right now, it just seems like Joe Biden's like screwing up right and left, and the economy's in the toilet because we have like Venezuelan style inflation. You know, like they kind of exaggerate.
Oh, yeah,
engage
for
in
sure.
like tons of hyperbole. And then and so Derek said this in the podcast though. He said that he's seeing distortions in the media on the left too, where they act like the inflation's not real.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah, or it's not that bad. We're like, it's getting a little high.
Yeah, objectively, it's higher than it's been in decades. But then some left-leaning media are like, no, this is like, and the Biden administration was guilty of this too for months.
Yeah,
Of talking it down. It's a very strange time in American life now where you genuinely are experiencing different versions of reality just based upon what channels you're watching, what party you're in, and that even includes what you think the quote-unquote economy is doing.
Let me ask you this. I think it's helpful for me personally, but I think most of our listeners. What is your opinion on why we have inflation right now? And if you could touch on the stimulus checks and whether they had anything to do with it, or because you were the free cash guy, and one of the biggest questions we got all the time was, won't this cause massive inflation? And we did some stimmy checks, and now we have inflation. But you've talked this about you before. There's not really a direct correlation if you break it down. But I'm curious your thoughts on where we're at and why we're here.
There are a couple of reasons why the main reason we have an inflation is that you have more demand than supply. Just like people want stuff, there's not enough stuff. and so the prices are going up. Related,
so supply chain shortage.
Yeah, related, you're having a hard time with supplies. I'll give you an example. I went to buy a bike for my older son a number of months ago. Went to a bike shop and they were like, hey, we have no new bikes. And I was like, interesting. And then to the extent they had any bikes, the bikes were expensive. You know what I mean? So then, so you play that out across different categories, and so you have high inflation. Mm-hmm. Now, the simple relationship people are putting out there is like, oh, you've like put more money in the system, so prices went up. It's like, let's imagine that we had not put more money in the system. Is there a bike in that bike shop waiting for me?
No.
It didn't solve that problem. So that's what's going on in different areas of the economy, and blaming it on quote unquote, printing more money, is an oversimplification. The argument I make is, look, we printed $2.2 trillion with the CARES Act, but it didn't go to people or families. It went to banks and airlines and the pipes. And so you can say it's like, oh, stop printing money, it's causing inflation. It's like, it's a little bit more complicated than all of that. Mm-hmm. But I will say that if you wanted to alleviate the misery caused by inflation, putting money into people's hands would be the way to go. Mm-hmm. Let's say you have some unavoidable level of inflation because of supply problems and it's harder to produce like certain livestock or whatever the heck that issue is. Like the way you would ease that would be by getting more money into people's hands. And they're making that argument a little bit with Build Back Better. They're like, oh, it's going to help you with childcare. It's going to help you with this, going to help you with that. So it's a tough spot, but you can see the partisan communication around inflation, which, by the way, my sense is that it is serious. It's painful. It's at a level now where it's hurting people who have the least the most.
Mm-hmm. Do you think worker shortages are imagine they are tied to this? Like, anything that's requiring human labor, if there's a labor shortage, that's harder. How much of a factor is that having? And is that also tied to like higher unemployment checks that people are giving, or unemployment benefits and things like that?
I think that we made a mistake by tying the enhanced unemployment benefits to not working. It should have been like, hey, we're going to give you this stuff, and if you get a job, fine. Because I talked to young people who legitimately were like, look, I'm not going to look for a job until I got his benefits.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was the problem. I do think that there are other factors involved where a lot of the missing jobs are in leisure and hospitality, which is just some people either were fed up or didn't want to be exposed because they might have some health issue.
Right.
I think a lot of people were burnt out and fatigued in different ways. A lot of people are just taking a step back to try to figure out what their next step should be. it's a tough economic picture. It's just right now the messaging, it's like, oh, Democrats printed too much money, that's why there's inflation. It's more nuanced than that.
Right. My mom works at a retail furniture store, and she says since COVID, people have just been miserable. It's like always. I don't know if you've ever worked in retail or hospitality. It's like it's usually tough dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, and people can be rude, and we're just human beings in many ways. But she's at like COVID is just people are different, either nastier or they're more on edge. And I think COVID is a number on most people's mental health and stress and financial stress or whatever it is. But yeah, that makes sense to have that job and not get paid that much, and it sucks, and it's even worse than it was. Or you could stay at home and take a decent unemployment check. Like, why wouldn't a lot of people do that? It's hard.
Well, it's interesting your mom says that, man, because like I have the sense that a lot of people are feeling that. It's one reason why, like, I feel frankly some responsibility to try and be upbeat or positive, because like people look up and it is lousy in many ways. And like it's like we talk about it in different ways in the pod.
Right.
It's a tough time. Hearing your mom say that, though, because you hear that about airline passengers, you hear that about different people in different contexts, where it's just like Americans are a little bit worn out, shall we say.
Snippier.
Yeah, like on our last nerve a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. Especially in New York, where we're always kind of shitty in general.
Well, so I want to reflect on this for just a moment, because this episode is going to come out on Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah.
So people imagine Andrew Yang to be very upbeat. What do they think about Zach Grauman? People think you're upbeat too?
I don't know. Probably not as optimistic as you.
I'm in some ways packaged as like Mr. Optimism, even though a lot of the shit I've talked about is like pretty dark, as I think a lot of you know.
I am pretty optimistic, but I just compared to you, it's a different, because you're a different level of that.
So I want to share with everyone. I'm a human being. I have my struggles and the rest of it. I talked to someone who's in the public eye as like a journalist type, and she shared with me, she's like, hey, it's kind of tough sometimes when like your job requires you to be optimistic, and sometimes you're not feeling it. I'm going to bring in something totally random, but maybe people will appreciate it. I watched a Katy Perry documentary a long time ago. Did you see this documentary?
No. She's got a fascinating story though, right? Daughter of a preacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's married to Russell Brand.
Yep.
And they're splitting up. So she's super sad.
Okay.
Because her marriage is breaking up.
Right.
And, she's on the road and tour. And it's so, like, the documentary is generally pretty benign, but like when they showed this one scene, you're like, oh no, where she's like crying, and then she's looking at the camera being like, I always say, I'm going to put my best face on because these are people who brought their kids to see me, and this is the only time they're going to see me. So like I always have to be positive. And so you see her like kind of like pasting on a happy face, even though that she's not, clearly upset, like super sad and doesn't want to be there, and is like crying through her makeup and whatnot, and then like puts on a happy face for when the little girl shows up for the one picture. So this journalist said something to me that reminded me of that. I was like, whoa, like that's like, I mean, not to that extreme, but she was like, hey, when you're in the public eye, you just kind of have to, put on the positive face. We're all human. This is not a great time in American life, I'm going to suggest, but we still have so much to be thankful for. Like I'm going to be able to spend Thanksgiving with my family and loved ones. My mom is with us and healthy. Our future is bright if we didn't just care about each other, think about the good things in our lives. I have so much to be grateful for. I have a list of things to be grateful for on my phone. And I do get down, I'm human, but then I look at it and be like, oh, wow. It's like, I'm so grateful for Evelyn, my two boys, everyone who's supported us in the Yang Gang, you, Zach. I don't know if I say it enough, but I'm super grateful for you and your friendship and partnership. There's so many people that have done amazing things for me and the movement over the last number of years. And I'm, it's fun. I don't know what people think about my spirituality or whatnot. Like I'm someone who definitely believes that, we have roles to play. And there have been times when anytime, I've been struggling or somewhat, like something happens where like, it brings your head up and you're like, oh, so I hope people have that experience. Hug your loved ones, call your parents. Hopefully you're with your parents this holiday, but have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And then, feel free to overeat a little bit, have some dessert, spend a little bit too much money and the next day on Black Friday. Look at that.
Do all those things.
Like distributing, like mindset of abundance. Don't worry about it. It'll come back to you.
No, we do. The things that matter, I think, is what I'm most thankful for, right? And I have my whole family. My brother just got his first house, so the whole family's coming to the house. It's gonna be a packed Thanksgiving, and the Bills are playing in prime time at 8:30. Oh, they lost this weekend. It was sad, but they're playing tonight. If you're listening, so happy Thanksgiving. Go Bills. No offense, Saints fans, but we need this one.
Happy Thanksgiving. Get that tryptophan.